Welcome to EV Hub Live, a live video podcast for professionals advancing transportation electrification. To find out more about the show, visit atlasevhub.com/live. In August, the Oakland Unified School District in California became the first major school district in the United States to fully electrify its school bus fleet. Each of the 74 electric school buses has its own bi-directional charger, allowing the bus batteries to return energy to the grid when they're not being used. The fleet was made possible by Zum, the leading provider of turnkey electric school bus solutions, and Pacific Gas and Electric Company, the electric utility which provides 2.7 megawatts of power to the site. On this episode, Ritu Narayan, founder and CEO of Zum, and Sarah Swickard, Vehicle Grid Integration Manager at PG&E, talk about the Oakland fleet as well as opportunities and challenges related to electric school buses. And I'm Nicole Lepre, Senior Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and I'll be your host today. Awesome. Welcome to EV Hub Live. I'm really excited to talk about this fleet and this charging project today. Ritu, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It's really cool to see actual photos of a charging site of that size. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about it. So let's start things off with a question for Zum. So Ritu, we're a couple months into the school year. How are things going so far with the buses and the chargers? Can you tell us a little bit about these first few months of operations of this site?
Thank you, Nicole, for having me. Electric school buses are having a moment. At Oakland Unified, it became the first school district in the country to be 100% electric. And the unique thing about this project is it's not just that it's 100% electric, but all of the 74 buses that are deployed there are equipped with the bi-directional charging. That means that we not only take charging from the grid, but when these electric school buses are not used for transportation in the evenings, which is also the peak demand of energy, we plug them back to give renewable energy back to the grid and adding to the grid resiliency. Now, interestingly, this is such a game changer for the community here because we are not only providing safe and sustainable transportation for the kids, which is very quiet for them and cleaner for them, but we are also providing renewable energy back to the grid and reducing the carbon emissions. So it's a win-win-win all across for our students, for our communities, for our climate.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the infrastructure choices and the site layout and how the vehicle-to-grid capabilities influenced the site design?
Absolutely. So for 74 buses, it's basically it's a very large power plant in a way. You can think about the first thing, we had to upgrade the utility here, partnering with PG&E, and they are providing 2.7 megawatt worth of power to the site. PG&E working with us were able to do this in record time, which allowed us to bring the project live in a year ahead of the schedule. We also have all the charging stations, 74 charging stations designed in such a way that the charging and discharging happens in a very seamless fashion where drivers just have to come back and plug the bus back into the charging station, and our software takes care of when to charge and when to discharge the buses. So we have the unique thing about the project is there's a software layer which takes care of the entire infrastructure and maneuvering of when the charging and discharging should happen. So it's a very thoughtfully designed project, and the playbook is it in such a way this can be scaled up to any district across the country, and that's our mission, to accelerate the energy transition in this area and bring it to as many districts as possible across the country.
Awesome. The next question is for PG&E. So Sarah, can you tell us about PG&E's role in the project, and why was PG&E enthusiastic about being involved?
Absolutely. So PG&E supported this particular project with two of our programs. One is called EV Fleet, and that is our large-scale infrastructure program supporting fleet customers who are electrifying their fleet vehicles. And so Zum applied to that program in 2022, and we worked with them to support the site design and get their project energized and operational by the start of the school year in 2024. That program specifically provides funding and does the construction for to the meter infrastructure, so connecting the site to the electrical grid. And then we also provide additional incentives and rebates for what we call behind the meter infrastructure that Zum constructs, as well as incentives for their chargers. So a big funding support for this project came from our EV fleet program, and we were very excited to partner with Zum in that way. And then the second program that PG&E offers is our Vehicle to Everything V2X pilot program. And this is where we're specifically looking to support and test V2G use cases. And Zum very excitingly raised their hand and said, we want to do this. We want to partner with you all, and really we want to be the first and the largest in PG&E service territory to enroll in our pilot and test V2G. The reason why we're so excited, in addition to what Ritu highlighted about serving our communities and addressing climate change, is from the grid perspective. We are seeing the needs of our customers as well as our grid change. And right now we're seeing a high amount of renewables in the middle of the day, and then a lot of stress on the grid during what we call peak hours, so that 4 to 9 p.m. And what was particularly exciting about Zum and school buses is thinking about their duty cycle. They go, they pick up kids, they come back to the yard, they have some downtime before they go and pick up kids from school and then drop them off. And that presented a really interesting opportunity to leverage these large batteries on the buses to soak up renewables in the middle of the day, and then reduce stress on the grid by exporting during those peak hours, all while still meeting the operational needs of the school buses and the schools. And then it earns it's an opportunity for additional revenue for Zum as a way to kind of make this whole ecosystem work. So really groundbreaking, really excited to partner with Zum to test out this technology and these strategies.
Awesome. So yeah, so I would love to hear more about the charging strategy and specifically kind of how that works operationally. Ritu, I know you mentioned there's not a lot of manual plugging and unplugging that has to be done, but yeah, I would just love to hear about is there any manual work that has to be done? What's happening virtually? How is that working?
Yes, absolutely. So the unique thing about Zum is our technology platform, which connects every single stakeholder on in the ecosystem, whether it's drivers, students, kids, school districts. But then we extended this platform to be able to connect the charging stations and their needs. From our perspective, this was super critical for us to be able to do remotely, and there is no manual process, and there is a manual intervention only happening when needed and in the exception area to make sure the system works seamlessly. As Sarah described, school buses are a very unique assets. They are large battery on wheels. They have a very predictable commute hours and a predictable commute mileage. So in the peak demand of energy in the evenings time, these buses come back to the yard. Drivers are plugging them back into the charging station. And at that point, our software takes care of knowing how much is the battery charged and how much they need to be discharged. We have all the calculations done in the background, and our system takes over and essentially plugs the bus back into the grid and provides the energy back to the grid. So all the things behind the things in terms of when the bus should be charged, when it should be discharged, is taken care by our software program. And that's a very huge innovation that has been done in this area, which is allowing us. For many years, people thought V2G is a use case, which is just an imaginary thing. It is not implemented. but Zoom has actually shown that, and partnering with all our partners in PG&E in the record time, how this project can be done successfully, not just electrifying the vehicles, but giving energy back to the grid.
Awesome. So I assume that's why every single bus gets a charger, so that you just can kind of plug it in and let the computer figure out what to do after that.
Absolutely. We have 74 chargers and some spare chargers for one charger per bus. And that allows us to, an interesting thing is our chargers also, we realize that the school buses, because of their commute pattern, doesn't have to be very high capacity or chargers that need to charge very quickly, because we have that cycle in the daytime and the nighttime, which allows us to charge at a regular pace. And that again allows us to bring this ecosystem in the record time and the cost that would be required to make a district 100% electric here.
Awesome. So, okay, the next question back to you, Sarah. So this might be our maybe most technical question, but I'm curious, can you tell us about some of the specific grid services that the batteries are providing? What are they doing for the grid?
Definitely. And I should lead with, I'm not an engineer, but I can give you at a high level what types of grid services the Zum project is providing, and kind of how we think about and value that at PG&E. So I think what's really critical, what Ritu hit on too, is that software component really helps this project and these vehicles be dynamically responsive to grid needs in a way that I think just wasn't possible before with traditional and standard rate schedules, and just how folks would plug in their vehicles to charge, or even traditionally fuel their diesel buses. So that software really opens up a lot of opportunity to respond to the dynamic needs of the grid. And so one of the kind of clear use cases is in California, we have the Emergency Load Reduction Program that is statewide and was implemented to address grid stress on usually really hot days. And there's a signal that's sent out calling for customers to reduce their load and or provide power to the grid if there's not enough generation to meet the load of our customers. And that's a program that runs from May through October. And Zum, given they were operational in August, was able to participate in this year's some of those emergency load reduction program events. And that provided some really critical load reduction, but I would say even more importantly, actually the export piece. We have a lot of customers and folks participating in the load reduction aspect of that program, but this is really the first time we're seeing vehicles participate in the export piece. And as Ritu mentioned, the size of the batteries and the size of the fleet makes this a really important asset for that program. So they participated, I believe they exported 19 megawatt hours during the first week of deployment during that ELRP program, which is really significant. So that's one service they provide, is addressing that kind of system level need of, do we need load reduction and or do we need additional generation? One of the other grid services we're actually testing in PG&E's V2X pilot, which the Zum project is enrolled in, is responses to our hourly flex pricing rate. And that includes pricing of energy from a system or generation level, but also addresses some of the distribution and local constraints. And so our desire is to understand, can customers respond to pricing signals that are very localized and address specific needs on their distribution circuit. So we are rolling out that rate to Zum in the next month. And then we'll start to see Zum's ability to respond to those price signals and be able to measure the impact on addressing distribution constraints, which is, I feel like I say this about the project, like every piece of it is new and novel, but this will be the first time we're kind of testing that ability to respond to distribution constraints.
Very cool. And I'm just curious, in the summer, will the site sort of do a bunch of extra things since school's out?
Absolutely. So in there is an extended summer program, even though the rides are at the reduced level. So our calculations, basically, the way we had done, we have assumed that not just assume, we know that there's certain kilowatt hours is available to us, like around 50 kilowatt hours on a weekday and 80 kilowatts hours on a weekend. So that's how we, like, on summer months when the demand for energy is higher, interestingly, our buses would be available even more in terms of providing energy back to the grid, while kids would still enjoy in the after school programs and the summer programs the rides that they do as a regular part of the program, but the buses would have more capacity to give back. And that is where I come back to it, like, school bus is such a wonderful asset in terms of the size of the battery which is available, the commute patterns, the availability. It is not used for transportation in the peak demand for energy, which is in the evenings and the summertime, making it absolutely a beautiful partnership between any local utility and PG&E and between Zum to give the energy at the right time when the resilience on the or at the grid is needed the most. So we, from our mission perspective, we consider it as a very important resource for the electrification and grid resilience. This whole school bus system, our mission is to electrify 10,000 buses in the next few years. And by doing that, potentially you can provide 300 gigawatt hours of energy to charge millions of homes across the country. And that's pretty exciting. The other aspect is the mobile resiliency aspect of it. The fact that school buses are not plugged into the wall, they can move and go around and provide the energy anywhere, could potentially in the future would also be a very big aspect in terms of the usage. And that's why we value this partnership with the utility and PG&E so much.
Awesome. So this one, Ritu, this is for you also. How important were vehicle to grid services in making this project work? Can you sort of talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So electric school buses, even though we love them, they are 3 to 4 times they can be more expensive than a regular diesel or ICE buses. So in terms of making them economically viable, V2G charging is a very critical aspect to making the economics of the projects work. And that's where all the projects that Sarah was describing are in the pilot in terms of events that can actually provide the rate cuts, or the price back to Zum is a very important component for us to making this project viable and continue to scale the project across the country to all the districts here. So V2G is a super critical component, not just to bring the resilience to the grid and allow for more electrified vehicles on the grid, but also from the cost perspective, making it a viable project.
Awesome. And this is for you, Sarah. So PG&E is bringing 2.7 megawatts of power to this site. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How was there anything that made that work particularly well? I know it got done pretty quickly. Were there any challenges there?
Yeah, that was a really interesting part of this project. So as Zum applied to our EV fleet program, looking to install these 74 chargers and requesting the 2.7 megawatts of load from our grid in Oakland in that particular distribution circuit. 2.7 megawatts is a pretty good size. It's not the biggest project we've done through EV fleet, but it's a pretty good size. And we did end up having capacity constraints on their circuit in Oakland. And so that, I think, was the first challenge to getting this project completed if there's capacity constraints, and I think severe capacity constraints to the point of really not being able to potentially provide power at the levels that Zum would need to make their project operational. It's a good amount of buses that need to charge, and especially during peak hours. So we know what Zum is doing is providing a critical service to the school district, and the last thing we want is for them to not be able to pick up the kids or not to be able to charge during the times that they need to in order to do their routes. And that's what we were facing, a capacity constraint, particularly during the peak hours when they were looking to charge. But we didn't take that as that no as an answer, and we really worked with Zum and some of our load management specialists and our distribution engineers to kind of think through what could we do in order to provide power to this site and allow Zum to continue to operationalize what they were trying to do. So we leveraged a lot of managed charging strategies, and managed charging is a pretty broad term, but especially thinking about the times and the amount of when these buses would be drawing power from the grid, and discussing what Zum's operational needs are and what the grid could provide. We were able to provide almost 2.7 megawatts of capacity overnight for that charging. So essentially kind of meeting their full load request overnight for those buses to charge, which, as Ritu described, like did meet what those two buses charging schedule could look like. They are at the depot overnight and so are able to kind of recharge their batteries. And then also we're able to provide a smaller but a good amount of a good amount of energy for capacity for any emergency charging that might be necessary during peak hours. So we know sometimes buses, maybe there's road work and they have to take different routes, or something happens and the buses do need to charge. We still wanted to be able to provide some power. So it was really a combination of load management strategies and the creativity of our engineers, and I would say the collaboration with Zum, of their willingness to think outside the box, and instead of saying this is the amount I need and I want it all the time, being willing to work with the utility for what they actually needed during those hours, and allowed us to energize the site earlier than we expected and see these school buses roll out. So a big challenge, but I would say it was actually a huge success of this project.
I would like to add to that one of the things very unique about the school bus is also like the back to school date doesn't move. So you had to do transition backwards, making sure the utility power is available, all the chargers are installed, the buses are there, drivers are trained on the new technology of how to drive these electric buses. So that's where the timely partnership and making everything available was so super critical. What Sarah said, like working in backwards and making sure everything works, and it is a mission critical project. Like every single day, all 74 school buses have to be charged and going, and same thing in the afternoon. So considering the time aspect of it and mission critical aspect of it, this partnership was so super critical in terms of innovation of how to work on the blocks where charging can be done, how to work on the blocks where discharging can be done. And that's one of the things I would really highlight for the audience here if looking to do similar kind of projects in their community.
Awesome. And then I have a question. So I think sometimes I imagine it's a challenge, but I'm curious, is there any backup power at the site if there was an outage? Is there any, or is that something for the future, anything like that?
There was a scenario where we had a live, I would say live test almost, where there was an outage and PG&E very quickly had to essentially bring things back. But at this point, the charging and the discharging is happening in such a way that buses have enough power available, excess power available to go through at least a day or a couple of days of it, even if they don't get charged every single day. And PG&E has worked remarkably well in terms of outages and how we can handle it, and as if it's a mission critical project in record time also. But Sarah, feel free to add anything from your side.
No, I think that's right. There's no backup power source to fuel the buses on site. I'll leave it to Zum to share about any future plans if they have. But I think we did have a kind of real world test of the power going out, and unfortunately that does happen. We can do as much as we can to prevent that. but it can happen in cases. And I think what we learned from that was the communication, the close communication and partnership between Zum and the utility allowed us to really quickly respond to the outage and address what the issue was in a way that would still enable the Zum buses to go and run their routes. And as Ritu mentioned, I think they did build in some of that emergency planning and redundancy, that those buses have large enough batteries and you do charge more in order to ensure that if you can't charge the next time, you're still able to run the routes. So kind of contingency plans for how to address any outages as opposed to any additional DERs at the site, at this time at least.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this one is for both of you. Whoever can go first. So what would you say are some of the key lessons learned or best practices that can be applied to other similar school bus projects, either in California or outside of California?
Yeah, I can take first here. I mean, the school electrification, I would say, is a pretty massive project in terms of number of stakeholders involved in the ecosystem and planning involved. I would say the biggest long pole turns out to be what Sarah pointed out, is upgrade of the electrical grid capacity that's needed depending on the number of buses. And that could be potentially a long pole. So working with the utility, looking at that is a very critical component. The second is for us in the future, actually, we are working with utilities to plan out the sites where that kind of capacity is already available. So that's one of the consideration that people who are planning the project should do. Second is in terms of electric buses, it was very critical for us to have all the buses and chargers bi-directionally powered. So that was a very critical component of it, and making sure the construction and all the project happens in time of the target drill date, which can be a pretty dramatically tough project in terms of training and ensuring that the safety and capacity is there. I would say for us, safety and reliability was super critical given the mission critical nature of the project. So using the software layer in terms of maneuvering and orchestrating and designing the entire circuit around how could we use the capacity in such a way that there is no hazardous situation, that is also something very critical that the partner should plan out and take care of it. After that, once the playbook is up and running, it is something which, at least from our perspective, is highly scalable. We can take this playbook of Oakland and our partnership with PG&E and basically take it to any of the 14 states that Zum is currently operating in. And that's the beauty of the project from our perspective.
Yeah, I think a lot of my lessons learned are similar to what Ritu mentioned. Like, who you pick as your partners is key. And man, we got really lucky with Zum in just their willingness to collaborate, their creativity, their flexibility. Because whenever you do something for the first time, and especially something big for the first time like this, things are going to go wrong and there's going to be challenges. And so I think finding those right partners was critical to the success of this pilot. And I'm continuing to see that even as we get into just operations and enrollment in the pilot. The other thing to hit on, as Ritu mentioned, I think best practice is involve your utility early and often. I think that can help with even if possible from the original site planning. As Ritu mentioned, like there are spots on our grid that have excess capacity. And if the customer has flexibility in exactly where they site their project, that can really impact and speed up timelines. And then one other best practice that I want to kind of highlight that Zum did really well is I feel like they took a whole system approach to electrifying their school buses. They didn't view this as just a replacement of diesel buses. This was, we want to electrify, but we want to think about the grid services we could access. We want to think about how to best optimize our charging and our discharging, and acquired software in order to be able to do that. And I think that should be a best practice for fleets looking to electrify. You can't just think of this as a like replacement of vehicles one-to-one. There's a bigger ecosystem that needs to be put into place. And I think Zum did that really well.
Awesome. And I think that you've both sort of touched on this and given some examples that will speak to this, but I'm curious, to what extent do you think some of these lessons learned can apply to not just school buses, but other types of bus fleets?
These can be definitely applied to other types of bus fleet. The key critical component that I would like to highlight is, like, every vehicle, for example, city buses have a different nature of commute as compared to school buses. So you would have to tailor the program of charging and discharging based on it. Again, want to emphasize school bus happen to be an ideal case for electrification because of the local commute pattern and the pattern which aligns with charging and peak demand of energy in the cities. But similar things can be applied to any other kind of fleet.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about at time, I guess. Is there anything, any final thoughts either of you want to leave us with about this project or school buses or electrification in general?
There's one thing I just wanted to highlight, that we work with several partners, in this case EPA and the local Bay Area air quality management, which also help us make this project viable. So definitely audience should look out for those local partners as well as the federal level partners for the viability of the projects, and it really helps us in that direction. And again, our mission is to electrify 10,000 school buses across the country, across the nation in the next few years, bringing resilience to the grid and potentially 300 gigawatt hours of energy back to the grid.
Awesome.
And I'll just do a general call of we are looking for partners to kind of continue this work that Zum has started. We're looking for folks who are interested in electrifying their fleets for our EV fleet program. We're looking for folks who are interested in testing and deploying V2X technology. And I would be more than happy to chat with anyone with interest in either of those areas as we look to really open up opportunities for customers who are looking to electrify, which benefits communities, benefits climate, but can also benefit the customer directly, bill savings, revenue opportunities. And so from the utility perspective, we're here to help. We would love to engage with you, and really, really appreciate the partnership with Zum in kind of making this first project a reality.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. That's the show for today. Bye, everyone.